Recently, Ben at Questing Beast had a great episode on the lost key to understanding old school D&D. Old school games had some weird rules. In original D&D, a campaign was described as being for between 4 and 50 players. In advanced D&D, 1 day of real time equaled 1 day of game time, and 1 gold piece equaled 1 XP. But why? These rules may seem arbitrary and antiquated to modern players, but there's a good reason for them. Today, a campaign generally means a narrative featuring the same group of players portraying the same group of characters in the same storyline. But for Gary Gygax, campaign meant an ongoing series of games set in the same world, much like the MMO or open world video games we enjoy now. Today, this style of gaming is called the West Marches or open table concept, and while many players think it's new, it's actually very old, the way D&D was originally played. Many of Gygax's forgotten rules are essential for running this type of game, and we're going to talk about its history, how it developed, why it fell out of favor, why it's coming back, its numerous advantages, and most importantly, how you can run a West Marches open table campaign of your own. Today on Dungeon Craft.
Deathbringer here. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on any cool content.
D&D emerged from the Twin Cities gaming club scene where Dave Arneson ran his Blackmoor campaign. The campaign had over 20 participants, and it centered around Castle Blackmoor, a mega dungeon with multiple levels inhabited by monsters. One quirky OSR rule is 1 gold piece equals 1 experience points. Like, why would that be? Well, it was a way for Dave Arneson to incentivize his players to explore deeper and more dangerous dungeon levels under Castle Blackmoor. You needed gold to get experience points to gain levels and improve your characters, and Gary Gygax used Blackmoor as the prototype for his Castle Greyhawk in his Greyhawk campaign. In Blackmoor and Greyhawk, several groups of players would inhabit the same world concurrently. The actions of one group would impact all the others. Let's say Group A met on Friday night. They go into the Caves of Chaos, clear out the Kobold lair, kill the chieftain, and take his treasure. Group B meets on Saturday, and they enter the Kobold lair to find nothing there but rotting kobold corpses, flies, and a few stray copper pieces. This creates a sense of competition among the groups. You don't want to go too long without playing because there's another group chomping at the bit that can steal the treasure that you need in order to level up. It's a sort of dungeon capitalism. This sort of campaign centers around a home base, like the Keep on the Borderlands, where characters can rest, heal, and store their gold, and return at the end of the session. No one can be harmed, no one can be killed while they're in the keep. The Caves of Chaos is a few hours away, so it's possible to journey to the caves and journey back at the end of the session. And that's important for the open table concept because technically someone from Group A could also play in Group B. I often get asked, what do you do when a player is absent? Many players play that type of episodic campaign where like you're in the middle of a quest or in the middle of a forest or a mountain range when you end the session and pick up for the next session. But this sort of open table campaign doesn't have that. You return to the home base. So that means you can swap in and out to other groups, you can swap characters, and you don't have to worry or make an excuse if one of the players can't make it. This is why in AD&D, 1 day of rest heals 1 hit point, and why 1 day in real time equals 1 day in game time. So it's easier for the Game Master to keep track of which character is where. Players also have a stable of characters. If one is injured or killed, they simply play another. Each group can build its own identity with its own colors and shields and banners and names like the Skull Crushers or the Deathbringers. It's also a lot more casual. The Game Master is not compelled to think of complex narratives and how is this campaign going to end? It depends on the players. They're the ones driving the next session. They have to say to the Game Master, hey, we want to play Friday night, and they find the Game Master, and the Game Master says, yeah, I can make it, or no, I can't. So you're going to have the players coming to you much more often. This style of campaign fell out of favor in the 1980s with the publication of the Dragonlance novels by Weiss and Hickman, and the accompanying series of modules by Tracy Hickman. The Dragonlance modules were narrative-driven rather than location-based, and they sought to emulate the epic fantasy of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Campaigns, including my own, moved away from location-based scenarios to this new narrative style. Other RPG systems followed suit, offering prepackaged campaigns heavy on story. Games Workshop's Warhammer the Enemy Within followed this formula, as did Call of Cthulhu campaigns like Horror on the Orient Express. Modern campaigns like Tyranny of Dragons followed this model, taking characters from 1st to 10th level and beyond. Critical Role is very much in this style, with the Game Master designing encounters and villains and epic plots. One potential drawback of this style of campaign is Game Master Burnout. It's tough for the GM to keep thinking of new plots, and if they have writer's block, well, you can't play. Another unintended side effect is it can create very passive players who view the Game Master as a storyteller, and instead of initiating plot lines themselves, they wait for the GM to give them a plot hook, and if they don't get one, they will do nothing. An open table game has 3 distinct advantages. 1, it shifts the creative burden from the Dungeon Master to the players. They're going to decide when they're playing, how often, and where they're going to go. They're also going to generate their own plot threads and ideas just naturally. The competition between the different groups will make it so conflicts inevitably arise and plots will create themselves. 2, your prep time is greatly reduced. It may seem overwhelming, like you have to plan this huge world, but actually you only have to stay one step ahead of the players. You don't plan this type of game more than one session ahead because you don't know where the players are going or what they're going to do. And 3, you get to play more often. You don't have to worry about absent players. And players will be absent less frequently because, again, they're competing with different groups. So that dynamic creates a table where everyone wants to get to the game as soon as possible. So here's how you do it. Start with a blank piece of hex paper and place your home base in the center. Mine is the Keep on the Borderlands, an isolated citadel in the northernmost part of the Empire, and it's the center of my campaign's universe. The purpose of the keep is to guard against invading monsters. The characters have traveled there, lured by the promise of adventure and treasure. This is what the characters and the players know of the world. If they want to know more, they need to talk to NPCs or go out and explore it. Near the keep is the village of Gromlet. Directly to the east are the caves of Carnage, where terrible monsters and legendary treasures await. In the West Marches campaign, the characters carved a map on a wooden tavern table with a knife. As different groups explored the region, they would add details to the map. Gradually, it might look like this. This is the province of Tormentia, ruled by the cruel Countess Claudia von Hammerstein, whose castle can be seen in the lower right corner. The characters can travel to any location within the Yellow Ring, spend a few hours there, and return to the keep by nightfall. When in the keep, the characters are safe from monsters, and their treasures are secure in the Lone Bank. The Castellan rules the keep with an iron fist and is always higher level than any of the characters. The characters can't be attacked or stolen from here, nor can they attack or steal from anyone else. All challenges within the Yellow Ring are appropriate for character levels 1 to 6. Outside the ring are challenges appropriate for characters levels 6 and up, like the Temple of Monumental Evil. What lurks there? I don't know. It may be years before the player characters explore it. You can use the classic Temple of Elemental Evil if you want, or drop in any module you choose. For the Cave of the Unknown, you might use Horror on the Hill. Goblin Hill is the site of the cannibal cultists from Lamentation of the Flame Princess Better Than Any Man, but it could also be Bone Hill from The Secret of Bone Hill. Maybe the Sunken Temple is the setting of Cult of the Reptile God. Doomskull Mountain might be where the Tomb of Horrors is located, and you can drop any module into the landscape and play it. That's the point. It's versatile. Notice there are no cities. The nearest city is 3 days away to the southwest. This is an untamed wilderness for the characters to explore. Don't put any more thought into it. Start with the Caves of Carnage and branch out from there. Here are the campaign rules modeled on the West Marches rules by Ben Robbins, originator of that campaign. I'll put the full rules on Patreon, but I'll paraphrase them here. 1, you choose where you go. The adventure is in your hands. At the end of the session, you have to tell me where you're going next so I can plan accordingly. 2, Players can join on an at-will basis. There's no set party. You can and should adventure in different groups. 3. The players have to schedule the sessions. If they want to play, they have to take the initiative. 4. Players can play as many characters as they want, and multiple characters are encouraged. 5. Each session is self-contained, and characters return to the keep at the end. 6. If the characters change the world, everyone else will see that change in later sessions. 7. The keep is home base, and it's safe. You can't be killed, you can't have anything stolen from you, and you can't kill or steal from anyone. 8. High-level NPCs will not accompany the characters on quests. There are no NPCs to round out the party. If you want a rogue or a cleric, you have to find one. And finally, player versus player combat is possible, but it's never lethal. If a character attacks another character and reduces them to 0 hit points, they are knocked unconscious. Today we have a special guest, my progeny, Michael, and he runs this style of campaign. So, Michael, what's your advice to the viewers?
Keep a solid map with lined out locations. Keep their own notes. Don't lose them. Really important thing is having interesting locations, because if they're not interesting, people don't really want to explore, and I find that's one of the most rewarding things about running this style of campaign. It gives the players a lot of opportunity for exploration, because it is really like an open world game.
I want to stress, though, that you don't have to over-plan. You name a location, like this is the Abandoned Abbey, this is Goblin Hill, and you don't design that location until they say, we're going there, right? I mean, is that how you do it?
No. I have a lot of free time, and because of that, I'm able to create a really, really, really fleshed out world, and I know what everything looks like, and I know how everything is designed. Just so I can keep the flow of the game. But that's not always viable for people. If you don't have that kind of free time, then yeah, do it more on a location basis. If someone's going somewhere, then keep it out.
What I'm saying, though, is you don't design, if you have the Evil Abbey, you don't design all 6 levels of it in advance, do you?
I do.
Okay, well,
I do that before my campaign even starts. Every level of it, every location is extremely fleshed out.
This is kind of messing up my video, because my whole thing is like, don't worry about that until the end.
I know, and we have very different viewpoints on D&D and how we run our games. I have a lot of free time, and I hate being underprepared. I've stopped giving my players like story missions. It's really just like whatever they want to do. Something really similar would be the new Elden Ring. Elden Ring is very similar to how I've always been running my campaigns, where it's a developed world, a developed lore, but that's it. There's no real story. It's just whatever the players want to do at any given time. I run it very like bounty hunter-esque. The Mandalorian, that was a big inspiration when that came out for how I wanted to run my thing. The Witcher, like just reading the Last Wish and stuff, the idea of like bounty hunters and bounty boards was really appealing. So I set up more bounty type systems. And some of them are really easy. They don't need a big party, and like that variety and quest difficulty and size, like party sizes needed to really clear a dungeon. It allows them to prioritize, and maybe only a couple of people want to play, and I'm just down to DM whenever. So I've had so many times where only like 2 of my friends came and they were like, we want to do a mission just so we can level up our characters and be ahead of the party.
So the other thing you talked about is your players having conflicts with one another, these 2 groups that meet at separate times. Talk about how that happened and how you resolved it.
Yeah, so one thing with the open world and having like time progresses even if you're not playing the game. They kind of had this thing of just one-upping each other and one-upping each other until it all came to a head where they agreed to meet for one session where they met in one common location that both of them were close to and could travel to, and they killed each other. They butchered each other. They had an all-out brawl, and it settled the kind of storyline between those 2 factions. The entire party got wiped out. One killed the entire other party.
And you really don't have to plan an antagonist as much, because they were their party's antagonists.
Yeah. They had factions that bound them and created that like obligation, but other than that, the antagonist was, each other. And, it's kind of interesting because I develop NPCs for both of the factions, so both of these groups have different NPCs that they like really adore and love, and they're like best friends. It's your best friend NPC. Everyone has like a best friend NPC that they always find themselves going back to, and the best friend NPC for one of them is the major villain for the other. So there's a lot of depth with it, and it was really fun to kind of like write from that standpoint, because you know, if you're writing from the standpoint of there's this big bad villain, it's really easy to make them really, really evil, but that doesn't really give them any redeeming qualities. But if you write them as both the best friend of someone and as the villain, you have to give them at least some redeeming qualities, because you can't really be friends with someone who just wants to murder everything. There has to be something that makes people like them. That's probably my favorite experience, running that kind of campaign style. It's just really enjoyable when things come to a head and players actually interact, even though they're not part of the same party.
So thanks for stopping by today, Michael, on Dungeon Craft. And if you have your own thoughts on how to run this type of campaign, please share them in the comments below. Also put any questions. We'll be happy to answer them. Also below, you'll find links to Dungeon Craft on Facebook and Patreon, where you can get my House Rules Deathbringer with layout by Runehammer, and you can support this channel. And for more great Dungeon Craft tips, check out these videos over here, and may all your rolls be 20s.
No lethal player-on-player combat. What kind of bull is that? Sign me up for Michael's campaign, and sign yourself up to get a t-shirt and watch more Dungeon Craft.